Okay, we know that this pandemic has changed our world, and the impact of coronavirus, of this crisis, will be extremely huge. And I'd like to ask, what is your strategy for these difficult times?
So we have set 3 priorities during this period, and the first priority is to take care of the health and safety of our employees. Mm-hmm. The second is to do the same with society, because with the pandemic, there is a risk of infection everywhere, both in our plants and in society, and between family members and friends. So we want to make sure that our actions also do not contribute to further infection, and that we make a positive contribution in the local societies where we operate. And the third and final priority is to simply keep wheels turning, meaning keeping our production running. We make an important contribution to many value chains. One is medical equipment, another one is the food chain, and the third is transportation. All of which are vital for a society to be able to function and for people to cover their needs also during this very special period.
Okay, let's talk about this last priority, about production. Mm-hmm. Were you forced to idle, to stop some operations?
Yes, this has been quite a dynamic situation, because already late January, we had to idle the first plants in China. Late January and the beginning of February. We have 3 plants there, and they were all affected. Those plants are now completely reopened again and running at approximately full capacity. However, since then, we have experienced the same in Europe, and we are experiencing this also now in North America and in South America. So for the time being, approximately 10% of our 120 plants are closed. Approximately another 10% are running at very low capacity. Mm-hmm. And approximately 50% of the plants are running at somewhat reduced capacity, while the final 30%, they are not affected at all. If we would have had this interview 1 week ago, I would have had to tell you that almost 20% of our plants were fully closed at that point in time. Mm-hmm. So during the last week, we have been able to reopen many plants, in particular Southern Europe. We are talking about the extrusion department, or what we call Extruded Solutions. Outside of Extruded Solutions, there are very limited reductions. So, for example, all of the smelters and bauxite alumina are running as normal.
What is the level of capacity in Extruded Solutions?
Well, in tons, 1.4 million tons. Right now, we are producing in total about 30% less.
Could you please describe the situation on the market, globally and maybe in Europe?
So, if I then start with China, because there it all started. China is more or less back to normal. Mm-hmm. But as you know, China is also exporting to many other countries. And the export business from China is currently the question in China, because the domestic demand is completely back to normal. But some of the exporters are not able to sell as much as in the past. Mm-hmm. When we look at the global market, it varies between the different segments. So, for example, the medical equipment segment, the food segment, they are doing really well and better than normal. While on the other hand, as you also wrote in your questions, automotive and transportation, they are much lower than normal. And most of the automotive manufacturers, they have approximately 1 month of stoppage in their plants. Mm-hmm. So this is where also we are feeling the pain the most. The average figure, as I mentioned, on order intake is about 40% less for the moment. However, there are big differences between the different continents. Now we are seeing that it is starting to increase again in Europe, while in the United States it is still decreasing. Again, I think this is due to the different stages of the pandemic in the different continents.
You've just said that demand in Europe is growing now. Is that correct, what I understood?
So the main reason why we had to close was because our customers were not able to receive products, simply because they had stopped operations. What is happening now, in particular in Italy and France and Spain, is that the industry is gradually reopening. That means that our customers, which were closed 1 or 2 weeks ago, they are now able and willing to take delivery of products. And this is what allows us to restart our production, and which is why we see that the demand is increasing.
Okay.
To what extent this will be continuing to increase going forward is very difficult to say.
I'd like to ask you about automotive industry and transportation industry. They are very important for aluminum suppliers. Do you think that they are able to overcome the crisis in short time? Is it possible?
Well, I think that the actions by governments will be very important here, because if we start with the car manufacturers, they produce capital goods that depend on consumers' willingness to spend a significant amount of money. So it's not like food, which you need every day and which doesn't cost that much. It's about making a decision which will impact your life and economic situation for maybe 10 years. And then the level of the interest rates in different countries is important. In general, the other initiatives governments will take to stimulate the economy, like, for example, public spending. So I think it is fair to assume that it will take some time before the car manufacturers are able to come back at full speed. Transportation is a little bit different, because transportation depends also on, for example, level of imports from other places like China. If in the future Europe is going to be more self-sufficient on some products, then we could actually see that there is new demand for transportation capacity domestically in Europe, meaning trailers, for example, and trucks and so on. It's very difficult to predict how this will develop.
I'd like to ask about European aluminium market. How do you think, what would be the main change in strategies of European aluminium suppliers?
We know that over the last decades, one of the big challenges for European industry has been imports from China and other countries outside of the European Union. Maybe now Europe will see the need to be more self-sufficient on critical supplies like aluminium and aluminium extrusions. So overall, I think demand may drop, but I'm also hoping that the share of imports will drop, so that there will be more questions for European produced products.